Looks like we're up and running. Oh, happy New Year, everybody. It's just welcome, David. He just joined. And welcome to everybody for the first Q Community Call of 2023. I've shared my screen, so hopefully can shout if you can't see the presentation. It's going to be a slightly shorter call today. Unfortunately, one person we had lined up for the spotlight session couldn't make it, so we will just skip that for this time because it was a little tricky to try and organize something last minute. But we already have somebody lined up for next month. So we're toying with the idea of possibly separating out the spotlight session from the community call itself so we can actually get through more projects. And instead, we would announce those ad hoc, which actually allows a bit more time to focus on the spotlight sessions, which perhaps for those projects or companies involved does better justice to what it is they're doing with Q. So we'll share more details on that. So today, we're actually going to be focusing more on project updates, release updates, and updates from the Q community and what folks have been doing. Oh, we've got a whole load joining from Grey Matter. Hi, Team Grey Matter. There we go. Everyone's there. Great. So, Marcel, I've lost a project update. Beg your pardon. I'll hand over to you for a quick update on the release side of things.
Yes, so we have been releasing a couple of 0.5 betas, as you've noticed. So the 0.5 release was a little bit longer than we hoped for because we kept running into new bugs, basically with some of the redoing of comprehension. So with the change in comprehension and LED, things have become a lot more principled and stable, but it was a big change. And that exposed some bugs. So we've in the latest beta 3, we've made some changes that make everything a lot more robust. Will make it easier to make changes in the future, like a lot more control over order of evaluation. So hopefully that will squash the bugs right now. I do think there are still some disjunction bugs that we want to address in 0.6 that might be exposed by some of these changes. But like if it's not too big, we prefer to fix those in 0.6, where we're gonna take a much more fundamental approach to these kind of fixes. So please test the beta releases aggressively, and hopefully we can move to 0.5 like quite soon now. So beta 3, we expected to release it today, but we had some snags, so it should be there imminently.
My bad on that. Sorry. Well, I'll fix the release and send it out later on.
Yeah. So thanks for everybody that already tested. People have really pushed it to the limits and found a lot of bugs and little snags. And thanks also for people that have submitted to private Unity. Then we'll talk about it a little bit more. So that has also, Unity has been always instrumental in catching problems early. And we're increasingly relying on that. Next slide. Yeah, so for 0.6, so in parallel to doing the 0.5 development, we've already done a lot of 0.6 development. So after the beta release, we're actually plan to immediately start checking in some of the 0.6 stuff. So probably even before 0.5 is released. If worse comes to worse, we'll start a 0.5 release branch. If we need to make some changes to 0.5, that shouldn't go in 0.6, but at least we should get to an alpha 1 release soon. So required fields is already implemented pretty much, and that's because it also changes the way optional fields are handled internally. This is a absolutely key change to also make disjunctions a lot faster, to implement the query. So the query extensions are heavily based on that. And it's also a whole bunch of issues in general, both in the language, adding more features, but also making the evaluator a lot simpler. So that is working. So that would be in alpha 1. So open list is another thing. So this is a language change. It's not backwards compatible, but so far we haven't seen any really issues with that. So as you know, like structs are open by default, and then with definitions you close it, but with lists they're always closed, and this poses limitations to people that seem to be unnecessary. So our goal is to change this in a separate alpha, but pretty soon, so that people can play around with it before 0.6. And hopefully not run into many issues. And we think this is much more intuitive, right? Because this basically makes lists behave exactly like structs. So close would then work for lists and yada, yada, yada. So also this is implemented. Like a few more things need to be ironed out there and verified. So this could also be happening pretty soon. Then core built-in extensions, especially the non-monotonic ones like not and must, num required, I think we call them now must require, must exist or something like that.
That's for the that's to sort of help support the one-of semantics that people currently have to sort of fake a bit.
Yeah, so right now we sort of suggest doing that with disjunctions, and it works, but it's really pushing the language to its limit, and it's not entirely doesn't capture the semantics entirely from protobufs. Very close, but not entirely. So with this built-in, it's actually much easier and much nicer to write, and you can do all of this without disjunctions. So
based on the problems and bugs that people report around disjunctions, and the code that we see people submitting around trying to do one-offs, it will massively improve things from an ergonomic perspective as well as an actual behavioral perspective. But so it'll be interesting if when that lands for people to actually start trying it in anger to see, okay, how does this not only work, but how does it look and feel as well? Because of course, when we're importing things from JSON schema or other languages, that'll be another situation where it'll be interesting to see how that manifests in the resulting queue as well.
Yep. And one interesting thing about this must required or must exist or whatever built in, naming is to be ironed out, mostly implemented, but naming is still naming is hard. Is that it basically encourages people to write schema exactly like Stefan Szymanski from Red Hat has suggested. This is done for Kubernetes, right? With this forgot how he called this normal form, but he suggests that even in JSON schema and an open API, there's ways of writing schemas that makes it way too complicated, and you should actually write it in this normalized form. So this would also encourage that same form in Q, basically. So it's very much like that. It makes it much more linear and simple. Does must exist help with generating code? I think it will make generating code also a lot easier. I mean, now we have to support both, right? We would still support the disjunction way of doing it, but I think it's quite easy to translate that into JSON schema and Open API. Actually, I think everything just gets a lot cleaner using that. So then we first wanted to do this for 0.5, but at this stage a little bit too aggressive a change. I think we want to disable support for the deprecated language features. I mean, these features have been deprecated for a very long time, but sometimes you see people still using them, and that's because in the API it's not disabled by default. But now we just want to get rid of this support altogether, right? Like, I mean, most people, I think some people might remember the double colon. I don't think many people remember the angular brackets for pattern constraints, or that Q had block comments. I mean, this is so incredibly old. And this has been, it's mostly, and yes, true. It's still accepted. Yeah. Top level package directory. Yeah, but basically, by removing this, I mean, we really need to get it makes the code a lot simpler, and so it's time to get rid of it, basically. So then another big thing, so we thought about splitting this at first 0.6 and 0.7, but we now want to do this within one release, so to also address performance issues. Part of that, to put it in one release, is that a lot of these performance improvements are heavily tied to the required fields. So since we have that in, and performance improvements is kind of a high priority thing, we want to do this within the same release. It makes sense. We have some tools, flows, performance improvements that kind of rely also on some of these other changes that seem to improve things considerably. List sort, that's also implemented. It's a little bit, it's a re-implementation of list sort that in the one of the issues that's reported, it reduces the runtime by like 80%. And this is a first step. We could reduce it in total to like 90% if we do a little bit more tweaks for the common case. But this should already help a lot, and it's should be backwards compatible, but it's a re-implementation, right? So we didn't want to put it in the beta just before the 0.5 release. But as soon as we start submitting 0.6, we'll do that. So disjunctions, again, it will take a little bit more work, but yeah, we hope to have that soon. There is actually a release in beta 3 that already, for some cases of disjunctions, also reduces it by 90%, but there's several things wrong with disjunctions. So it depends on your use case whether it will reduce the running time. But, even so, like we expect it to, to be considerably faster in upcoming releases. Yep, that's right. So with the query language, with the required fields, especially, so not so much query language, but with the required fields, once this is out, so this changes a little bit. It's backwards compatible, but it changes a little bit what is idiomatic queue. So we'll do like some special office hour or presentation on that to tell people like how this changes things. But unlike the first required fields proposal, this is actually backwards compatible, so transitioning to it should be quite straightforward.
And to just join the dots as well, the required fields are mentioned or will be mentioned in the first cut of the language guide as well.
Yeah, so the language guide, so as a final sort of test, litmus test of if whether required fields in the open list makes sense is, so we wrote the language guide with these concepts in mind, and to see if that would make writing a language guide easier, and it seems it really does, right? It makes it a better separation between schema and data and all these things. Of course, it's still Q, right? So there's still a blurry line, but at least the concepts, it makes it much easier to explain the concepts to users in our view. Yep. So we've so part of the language guide, that the reason that we have all these new features is to see if it actually improves the writing around it.
Just to call out one other thing as well, the core built-in extensions would include the error built-in as well. Just trying to flag whether that would be included for policy folks who are interested in that one.
It's a little bit slightly less lower priority than the others. Also because the design hasn't entirely fleshed out, and so some was it Gray Matter, I believe they had a workaround, which is actually very nice.
So on the Gray Matter might do, but the chain guard folks definitely have a workaround from the policy side of things.
That was the chain guard, yeah. So that was actually a very nice solution. So, but yeah, the built-in approach would be nice. I mean, I think one of the key things is where we really want to get rid of the bottom symbol as well, because some people find it offensive.
Yeah,
it's hard to type, and so then replacing that with like an error built-in or pre-declared identifier, which then but if it can also be a built-in name, it's a little bit overloading it. So do we want to go there or not? Do we always want to require parentheses, or do we have for the built-in and error for the pre-declared identifier for bottom? So small little, again, naming. It's mostly naming. That's the problem.
Oh yeah, just trying to call that out, because that, along with the query language, will, for the policy folks, be sort of things that they're looking towards to write more idiomatic policy using Q. Cool. So the what's nice is that from everybody's viewing perspective, a number of these bits here, I don't want to say the majority, but a number of these bits have already been implemented. And so just to reiterate what Marcel said, with Alpha 1, we're going to get an Alpha 1 out as soon as possible. And as Marcel said, that might even be before the 0.5 release, the final 0.5 release is out. So that might seem a bit odd, but that just allows us to actually continue to make progress with 0.6 in parallel to just rounding out the last few issues in 0.5. And again, just to reiterate the point on simplifying this to one release, i.e. 0.6, that's really just because there's too many of these bits here. It seems like a very busy release again, but the dependency relationship between aspects of this release is too complicated to actually unwind into separate releases. It would just make for a lot of housekeeping, copying between different release branches and the like. Cool. Anybody got any final questions on sort of release stuff before we move on? Thanks for the comments, etc. No, so we'll move on. Rog, over to you on modules.
Okay, so yeah, I've been doing quite a lot of modules. I was working quite a lot on the proposal, which I talked about, and it ended up ballooning into something that was rather sort of up in the air and was too big for a first thing. So I thought it was actually better to go with a sort of minimal proof of concept implementation to start with, just to give us something concrete to go with, and then do, because there's a lot of design aspects which are actually not much better taken from experience, I think, rather than from something designing everything up front. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, and I'm making some for that I'm making some fairly strong assumptions, which is, for example, one of the ideas, one of the things I would like to happen is that when you use modules, you don't necessarily have to have a file system. You don't have to necessarily store all your modules on disk, but that basically involves solving there's an issue for putting IOFS support in queued load, and actually it turns out that issue is pretty hard to solve. I worked out a way of solving it, but it's quite disruptive and it's a big change. So I'm putting that on the back burner and just assuming that modules will be stored in your persistent file system for now. That probably that will be configurable. So that might be in a RAMFS and TUMP if you need it to be, for example. But that means that all the rest of the code doesn't have to change to be able to, which currently assumes file system paths. One significant thing that we're pretty sure about is that rather than Go currently, well, the way that the Go language approaches things is that the tool knows about all the various VCS version control systems that you can publish modules in, and therefore the tool has to know how to invoke all those tools and has to be dependent on all those tools, and there's a lot of complexity around that, and that's not necessarily great for Q, which can be used potentially not just on the command line, but also embedded in all sorts of ways. So to simplify that, and actually there are a bunch of other advantages too. The idea is to have more of a central repository that the client knows how to talk to with a standard protocol, and that would be replaceable with your own implementation or a proxy. But that simplifies a lot of things. And so with respect to the design of modules, there were a bunch of things that I wasn't sure about with regard what it actually means for Q to be compatible, to make a compatible upgrade, and I think some of those are quite hard to work out. So I've put that on the back burner for now, and said that for modules we're mostly just targeting schemas as opposed to templates or data, because that's still very useful, and I think it's much more clear. What compatible upgrades are when it comes to schemas, as opposed to templates. Would that be like an OCI registry? What's an OCI registry?
Open Container Initiative, but it is like a registry.
Yeah, it is essentially like a registry.
Yeah, I was just gonna pick up on that, Rog. You said central repository. yeah, perhaps registry might be a slightly better word, because repository perhaps has connotations of VCS, which we've said it's rather, which is not. So yeah, like Docker registry would be better. I think, yeah.
I agree. Yeah, that's and when I say is the most common approach, I reviewed about 7 or 8 different languages which have some way of doing packages or modules and network, and almost everyone uses this kind of approach. Go is actually a standout case that for doing it this way. The ones that don't only support GitHub, like for example Swift, like it is only GitHub. So I think it's not. I think there might be security. There are definitely, of course, security and publishing concerns, as Tony suggests. But I think in the end, this is something that almost every other language ecosystem copes with, and it's known territory.
Yeah, and also even in the Go team, right? Like so the design to not have a registry was sort of due to circumstances, this was the best approach. But even there is like often people think like, oh, if only we had a registry, right? It would have made things so much easier to manage. So
especially the private / enterprise angle that remains I think a not completely solved issue on the Go side of things when it comes to private modules, and this is something that would be solved much more easily via the design of a registry type system.
Yeah. So that's where we are for now, and hopefully we'll have something actually concrete for people to play with almost certainly under a feature flag in the not so distant future.
And Rog, just to clarify, that's again something that sort of we'd be bundling into what we're calling 0.6, as in we're not going to be doing that on a feature branch or anything like that.
That's right. Yes, it will be feature flagged, possibly by an environment variable or something like that. So you explicitly have to buy in and know that you're opting into something experimental, but it will be part of the regular release.
And one quick question before I jump to the Q&As, the questions that people are asking now. When we say minimal proof of concept, I'm sort of imagining in the back of my head that would, in the first instance, allow me to do something like a queue get a la Go get. Is that what we mean by minimal in that situation?
So my thought is that you have a module.queue file like we have at the moment, but with requirements, and that you have like a queue mod tidy, for example, that can resolve all your dependencies. I'm not sure if vendoring will be, which is obviously a very important thing to do, but will be available in the first cut. And for Jonathan, for thoughts and that sort of thing, there's a discussion.
It's linked from this slide, actually.
Yeah, it is. So those two are linked. So,
thank you.
Please put any thoughts that you had, particularly feedback about what I've just said in those. That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Anybody got any questions? Chance to shout out right now. Thank you for the questions that have been posted.
If not, yes, go on, Paul.
I was going to say, oh, here we go. Getting a queue module. So I'm just
there are lots of possibilities. Yes, thank you, George. Yeah, I mean there are some very powerful possible features. I'm not sure that having queue itself as the registry expressed in queue is a good idea, because I think that having the dependencies analyzable without having to evaluate queue is a powerful thing. So have dependencies at a meta level rather than actually just all part of the same universe, I think makes sense. But again, thoughts would be really, really useful.
Cool. Jonathan, we can follow up. I'll ask Rog, in the interest of time, I'll ask Rog to follow up on that question afterwards, in terms of whether he wants to respond to 2044 or a specific discussion around the choice of the hub model. Roger, is there anything else you wanted to round out on the module side of things?
No, I think that's probably good for now.
Super. Thank you very much.
Over to Aaron.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've been working on WebAssembly, and in case people are unfamiliar with or forgot what this is about, WebAssembly is a portable bytecode, so you can compile many languages such as Go. To some extent, it doesn't work perfectly with Go, but other languages like Rust, C, C++, most languages, you can compile them to this bytecode, and it runs in all kinds of environments like every architecture, or it can also run in the browser. In fact, that's how our Q playground works right now. And we want to add WebAssembly support to Q, and that would give users a lot of power. Basically, right now you can think of like the standard library is sort of a magic. There are some things you can only do in the standard library, but when we the primary thing is we will allow people to extend Q with their own code written in whatever languages they prefer, and that code will have more or less the same power as it is available to the standard library. For example, you could use this to implement things like expensive computations or algorithms in your favorite language, and then just call the computation from within Q. Or you can use this to interface your Q configuration with external systems. For example, if you have like a private authentication system or something like that, you could just natively refer to it from within your Q configuration itself, or you could again refer to some other third-party source of data in your Q configuration itself. So that's the primary thing we want to use WebAssembly for, but it can also be used in a different way to compile Q itself as a WebAssembly module and provide it as a library to other languages, because people do want to be able to use the Q library from example Python or Rust or some other languages, and this might be WebAssembly might be a way to do this. So we are doing this. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so one other thing is we could also use this to support other file formats, for example, without having that natively supported into Q.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the way we tackle this, there's a couple of questions that we need to answer that we sort of answered many of them. For example, the syntax of this, because we need a way to express the existence of functions within Q itself. Because right now functions are only a thing from the standard library, and then ask the question like how would this work? What happens when you unify these sort of things? So the plan we did that, so the plan is how do we expose this to the community? Well, the first cut we will expose WebAssembly functionality with limited types. That is not necessarily because Q.value essentially like a Q value is a very rich data structure, so it can contain like arbitrary sized ints and things like that. So for the first cut, we would just export or just interact with simple types such that are available in most other languages, like fixed type sized integers and sort of types like that. But what's really important is that we have a good tooling layer to make this all work properly. For example, we really wish to simply, for example, with Rust is a good example. People want to write Rust libraries, and with very simple Q tooling, we want to be able to make all this bridge work together properly. We do not want to force people to write bridging code that does things like marshalling and marshalling of data and complicated things like that. We want to take care of all those things. So you would just write on one side idiomatic code, for example, in Rust, and on the other side just write Q, expecting that the Rust code exists. And we want to do all the bridging layer. We want to generate all the bridging layer. And our primary target is Rust for several reasons. But we're really interested in what other languages people want to use this for, because that's what could really shape our future. Maybe Go, for example. Go doesn't have such good WebAssembly support as some other languages, but again, knowing this sort of thing, yeah, Python and JavaScript. Python definitely, Yeah, so it would be very good to hear from the community exactly what sort of language they expect to use this with, because yeah, that would be very useful. So then a next step would be to expose the Q standard library to the WebAssembly bridge itself. That is, from within your module, to be able to refer to functions from within the standard library. And then just the next step is, of course, is to be able to do effective WebAssembly. That is, from the WebAssembly module, if you want to step into the tooling layer, the WebAssembly, if you want to use the WebAssembly technology from the tooling layer, we would want from the that you would have access to actually I/O and do networking calls and whatever from within WebAssembly itself. So we have to express that thing in WebAssembly. And then there's a question of whether we want to use WebAssembly to expose Q as a library for non-Go languages. This is our current plan. This might change. It's just an avenue that we're exploring, but it's definitely part of the plan at the moment. Next slide, please.
Sorry, 1 second. Lost my window. There we go.
Yeah. So as I said, the stuff in green is the stuff that we already did. At least to the extent that's required for moving forward with WebAssembly. What we are working now, the most important part really is like the ergonomics of it. Like we are working on having this automatic generated bridge layer, because this makes it easy to use. Otherwise, it's very difficult to use. And we expect the first cut of this thing to be part of 0.6. And that's it for me. And any other questions? Let me see the questions. Okay. Yeah. So the order between function calls. Well, yeah. That's why it's very important that all these functions are essentially pure functions. Essentially, any sort of computation that you do in Q by calling function has to be a fixed point computation. So there's no possibility of diverging if all the functions are pure. So people should not be able to reason or depend on the ordering of functions, basically.
Yeah. So one idea we had is you can enforce a lot of at least side effects. That you don't have side effects with the environment, but to be purely hermetic might not be enforceable from a compilation perspective easily. But one thing we were toying with is that we sort of randomly compute a function twice and then see you get the same results, just like Go does the randomization of maps, right? To make sure that you have hermetic functions within Q. And then in the tooling layer, so to Steve's, to respond to Steve, like in the tooling layer, you could have effectful, like we could be more permissive, right, on what functions could do. So
and to add to that, WebAssembly, the way it works, when you load the WebAssembly binary, it's basically sandbox. So at least by default, it doesn't even have access to the environment. So it's rather difficult. So the side effects are really controlled. So of course you can still write code that's not idempotent, for example, by using globals or things like that. But even so, and that's one of the things that we can maybe work around it by doing the randomization that Marcel talked before. But you cannot just do arbitrary side effects and things like that, because the environment simply does not have access to the outside environment, except in the tooling layer.
Yeah. We've got a number of questions here. I'm just keeping half an eye on the time. Thank you, Daniel, for the reminder on that. What I'd suggest we do, these are good questions, and I think they need good follow-ups, is we'll get the transcript from these messages. Aram will jump to the discussion that you've linked for the WebAssembly stuff, and we can answer those questions there, and we'll CC in the people who've actually asked them. So I don't want to gloss over them too quickly. Marcel?
Yeah, just one quick answer to Jonathan Matthews, which is an important one. Like, how does a WASM integration distinguish itself from the don't fork the core language for concerns of not extending the built-in? So with WASM, the WASM functionality can be put in packages, right, and is shareable in a machine independable way. So this is exactly a way for people to share code without having to fork the language, right? So this is exactly addressing that issue.
So that's effectively the nice bit of overlap, for want of a better phrase, between Roger's work and Aram's work, is how those two actually come together.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. Aram, thank you very much. We're going to Daniel, private Unity support.
Cool. So as far as Unity, a quick reminder about what Unity is. It's a way for us to help us test changes to Q with third-party projects. We, of course, have our own regression tests, but the fact that we also test with third-party projects is sort of a symbiotic relationship because it extends our test coverage, but at the same time, those projects can be sure that Q shouldn't break them with upcoming changes as long as the tests are well done. And we do have a current system with Unity that runs on CI, but it only supports public projects with Git submodules. So we've wanted to support private projects for some time. The progress towards that milestone is, right now we have a GitHub app that allows sharing private GitHub code with us, with Unity. So it automates all of that. The app is not public yet, but it is implemented. The next step will be to automate this copying as new versions are published by these projects. That is implemented, but we'll also have to implement the machinery to continuously test those new versions. And then we will integrate that into CI like the current Unity system. So that means whenever a change is proposed to Q itself, we will run Unity on those projects with their latest versions to check that nothing has been broken unexpectedly. So this GitHub app will be available over the next few weeks. I will post an update on that tracker issue that you could see at the bottom, issue 111 in the Unity repo. And the aim is to onboard a handful of projects by the end of February, be it public or private. But again, the aim of all of this is for private projects because we cannot support them right now. And if you're interested, you can DM me on Slack, just so I have you on my radar. And I will let you know on the issue when that's ready. And
Thanks.
any questions?
I was going to say, thanks for the link, Steve. And yes, Alec, completely agree. Private Unity will be awesome because the thing that we've been with the 0.5 release, just to tie it back to what Marcel was talking about earlier on, those people who have submitted code for us privately because they have in their private repos found issues with the 0.5 release, we've been manually doing this sort of regression testing against their private code. So private Unity is just going to allow us to scale that in just a much more significant way. But at the same time, give those projects the confidence sort of ahead of time that we're not going to break them because it's already registered with Unity. So there's a really nice reciprocal relation. I'll try that again, reciprocal relationship there as far as Unity is concerned. Cool. Thanks, Daniel. And yeah, just subscribe to that issue for updates. Again, we're using these umbrella issues as a way of communicating. We'll try and do a better job of actually posting to them this year. Carmen, docs and content?
Sure. Just wanted to let everybody know we have been busy the last couple of months and wanted to let you know what we're doing, what's changed, what's in the pipeline, and what's next. Next slide. So we've been talking about beta in the past, and given all the to-dos and trying to just kind of incrementally build so that we didn't have to worry about a huge payload, we've decided to go for an alpha first. And that alpha is helping us cut our teeth and iron out all the kinks in terms of content automation. And we've partnered with a web firm that will help us with design and web functionality as it pertains to rendering that content, organizing that content, making that content interactive. So we wanted to be able to have a first initial MVP, so to speak, and the beta, as we had planned it, was just too big. So we went with, again, alpha. The initial content that you'll see in alpha is a language guide, which has been referred to before by Marcel. So this is a comprehensive guide around all of the language, the APIs, toolings, you name it. And so Marcel has been working a lot on that, and we will have that on our alpha, as well as the first cut of some tutorials and how-tos. The tutorials and how-tos are important because that provides a blueprint, a template, an example or sample that would allow you, as community members, to also contribute if this is something that you think, hey, I know how, or there isn't any how-to on X, I know how to do that. Here's a quick template, let me just submit it. go. So that is what we would call the contribution workflow, the last bullet. But there's also what we're sorting out, the content request workflow. So you may have a request for some content. This could be coming out of a support type of question that you've asked in the past by Slack, but it could be a bigger picture question, like, a common question that we might get asked, what is unification, or what is a configuration namespace? So those are the things that we're figuring out, so that once we publish them, it can just be as Paul has said, a turn the handle or an execution engine. Next slide.
Oh, sorry, Carmen, I've lost my window. There we go.
So the beta site is where we also are starting to really get some copy and some things where we want to be able to listen to the previous critiques from people. We want to have more examples on there, some more practical things for people to understand what is Q, what's it good for, how is it good for me, why is it good for my company or my project, and we're going to make it less academic. We also are partnering with people out there for use cases and case studies. So if you have a case study, if your project or your company already says, hey, we're using Q, we'd love to partner with you for a case study, there is an email there, documentation@q.works, that please feel free to do that. We're currently in the copywriting stages for the first initial ones. And the same would be for use cases as part of those practical examples. We also are going to make some small updates and iterations and improve visibility to a tour of Q. One of the criticisms that we've received is we have a tour of Q on the current qlang.org, but it is a bit obfuscated. So we want to take that and make that more visible and front and center. And then that could be initial get started for you. And then if you, for those of you who already are here, you probably would really want the language guide. But for people for whom you want to point to Q, who are complete newcomers to Q, that would be a good get started. And then iterate on more how-tos and tutorials. Blog posts, we'd like to start adding in some of the blog posts, and we want to continue to partner with our community to make this community-powered content. So that is what is on deck for beta. Next slide. So 2 weeks from now, on the 14th of February, we will have our first Docs and Content Call of the year. So please attend if you're interested in learning about these how-to guides and tutorials in terms of wanting to contribute, wanting to request that kind of content, wanting to author that kind of content, submit it. If you want to partner for a case study, if you want to include your logo on the new Q site saying, yep, we're a user of Q, we'd love to have our logo on the site. And then if you want to include your already published Q content, so there are some that already here that have blogs or whole sites that want it to be maybe interlinked or partner linked on the site, please let us know. We want to be able to have a rich ecosystem of content, whether it's generated on the qlang.org site or generated and then linked to from outside. And next slide. I think that's it for me. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer or just email documentation@q.works.
Cool. Yeah, just that there's an email reminder. Thanks, Carmen. Dominic.
Yeah, quick update from my side. So Project Ops, a lot of user feedback, use cases, user research. Like, I think this chat is already a good proof that there's lots of interesting, valuable ideas, questions coming in, and trying to collect this and learn from this. Updating a website, I help Carmen with a lot of topics there that's also very relevant from an operational perspective. Also, with an ambitious project, there's quite a lot to do. I think also Carmen put it in a nice way, so I put it down on that slide. Project health intangibles that are not found in the Git commit. So I'm working on that quite extensively. And there are also quite a few interesting conferences in the upcoming year. I could talk about this right now, but a few slides later, you will learn about this even more. So I hand over to Paul.
To me. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Very sadly, I don't have any update on the LSP side of things. That's largely because we were unblocking 0.5.0. Also doing work on the beta/alpha of qlang.org. And I've also taken some personal time off for the arrival of child number 3. So very glad to be back. And yeah, looking forward to 2023 being Q's year. So yeah, the LSP will be the thing that I'm sinking my teeth into. First of all, alongside the beta and alpha.qlang.org stuff. So I think we're now switching to announcements. Carmen, did you want to, or Marcel, chat through these?
Yeah, we can do, but one of both. I think Marcel's having a busy month this month.
Yep.
He will be the only Q representative attending these 3 conferences. So for anybody based in Europe, FOSDEM is coming up the weekend after next, or no, this weekend. This weekend. Yeah, this weekend. So Marcel will be there. If you are interested in speaking to Marcel, please ping us either in general on Slack, or we will have a GitHub announcement, or sorry, a post in the announcements channel and GitHub discussions. And if you want to add your 2 cents there as well, you can do that. Same for Config Management Camp. This is always a co-located event that happens immediately after FOSDEM for our config management enthusiasts. And Marcel will be attending and giving a talk on Q there. The talk's name is called Configuration Engineering. So for those of you interested and have the ability to get to Ghent, I heartily recommend it. And then finally, the Dagstuhl School, it's based in Wadern, Germany, is a school based on, it has lots of symposiums and seminars for all things computer science. And later this month, well, it's not quite February. So later in February, they will be having a symposium on resilient software configuration and infrastructure code analysis, to which Marcel will give his thoughts and be part of the plenary session there. Next slide. Further afield.
Oh, sorry, I've lost it again. Oh, too many windows.
Too many windows. Further afield, we have more conferences planned beyond February. The big one that may need some pre-thought from any of you who are interested in attending, again in Europe, is KubeCon EU, based in Amsterdam, Netherlands. We plan to be there the entire week, including some of the pre-co-located events. You'll start to see Q making its way into lots of different talks in all of these different co-located events. And some of you have already told us that you plan to give a talk on Q at KubeCon or some other events. If that's the case and you need us to help review things or just give you our thoughts, please again ping the channel or ping us in Slack or elsewhere in discussions. But there will be 5 of us, maybe more, in KubeCon EU. Next slide. Do you want to take over community updates, Paul? And we can maybe just share if there's any interjections that need to be made.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, you've pulled these together, Carmen, so go for it, please.
Sure. I just thought I'd do a roundup of just end the call on some fun things that people have been posting out in public on various fronts. So the first one was New Year's resolutions. Stefan Pradhan of the Flux and Argo CD has made a New Year's resolution to write all the config things in Qlang, and I think all of us would do well to make that our similar New Year's resolution.
It's certainly a safer resolution than saying that you're going to start running, which I found is...
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I mean, yes, it's a safer, but take care of yourself for those who are trying to run in the cold. For more information, ask Paul in the back channels what that was all about. Mitchell Hashimoto is many people are starting to take note of Q, including the HashiCorp founder on Q. I'll talk more about Q and Terraform in a future post. Next slide. The Shopify CEO, Toby Lutka, he likes to call himself the truffle pig of new technology. And so he has sniffed out a very, very good one in Q. And what I really liked is that this got really a ton of traction. And he emailed or DM'd personally to say how Shopify has adopted Q, but has not given permission on how. Hopefully in the upcoming meetings, he can say how, because it's a very nice and creative use of Q. Next slide. Hideki Yukui was at the Open Source Summit in December in Japan, and he has been given several talks on a network automation framework with Q. He also, or an NTT has also open sourced that as QSTA with a K. That is the bottom link if you are interested in looking. And it really is looking at how you want to provision and automate the provisioning of network devices using Q, Argo, and the Kubernetes. Next one. I think I saw Brad in here, but not Michael, but shout out to Fresca Project and Brad and Michael Lieberman. They also gave a talk at the OSIS Summit in Japan about securing your supply chain with Q, particularly the build pipelines tooling and how Q can help with making sure that some of the shared responsibilities in that are indeed going to be vetted, type checked, validated, et cetera, so that you can make sure that on the user side, you're not making any mistakes, and you can, as they say, shift left on making sure your configuration mistakes don't get into production. Next one. Okay, so there's like so many Carmens in the Q world. One is Roger's partner. Sorry, I'm going to say this partner, but she's a Carmen. I'm a Carmen. And then the VP of Engineering at Naptiv is also a Carmen. And she gave a talk at Kubernetes Community Days Spain about how App Native eliminates barriers with the OAM and Q. OAM is the open application model that is designed by Kubevela. So shout out to the Kubevela folks that are in the call right now. That was a good, and this is a talk that's only in Spanish, but you can, as I have told others, you can always try to get subtitles translated in English on the fly if you're really, really interested. But it's also great to have multilingual and globalized presentations. Next slide. This was something that was put in the discussions for show and tell. So we are seeing more people building Q tooling for platform engineering and internal development platforms to build these composable, modularized infrastructure abstractions. And so Q has been really great as part of developing that. So it goes to that repo to check out how that's done and for more information. Next
I think
slide.
the interesting one about this slide, just briefly to jump in here, was that this is another, I say another tool, I don't at all mean that in a pejorative way, is that this is a tool that takes the approach of presenting another abstraction as opposed to a way of working with the underlying configuration. So this sort of, I don't want to say age-old question, but persistent question of should we work with abstractions or should we work with the actual the underlying configuration sort of still persists. But it's great to see different tools trying out different ways with different abstractions, because of course it's hard to see that there's a one-size-fits-all abstraction, because otherwise you would have probably defaulted to the underlying configuration format in the first place, for want of a better phrase. So interesting to see iterations in this space.
Our very hello, Jonathan Matthews, who's in the call. He has started to publish some short videos about Q that show off a single feature or a single idea, snippets to show how you can use Q in your everyday production environments. I really enjoyed his first one about the basics of Q's instances. I know in our community Slack, people are like, I wish I had known this from day one when trying to understand instances. And so I look forward to seeing more of these stock cubes, which is a cooking and soup and analogy to be able to add and take out and flavor and whatnot.
Jonathan does not have a problem with naming things. He has a number of projects which are incredibly well named. So we know who to turn to when it comes to have problems with naming things. Stock cubes, a great start to 2023.
Yeah. And there's another one that I also watched. Brevity is hard, but I still think that this 12-minute intro video about the essence of Q, what is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in terms of Q? It's a very scintillating question. Go find out on that playlist that's shared in the link. Next one. More show and tell. So we have in our Q repo discussions, you can enter in a Q show and tell category. If there are things that you're doing with Q, please add them and we will add them here. This one was QGen, you can see in the link. And it is just building Kubernetes resources with Q. So I've included both the link to the discussions, what's labeled show and tell, as well as the repo itself. Next one. So generating network devices. So this is somebody that is, again, I think we're seeing a lot of this happening in the network engineering / automation space, but replacing your Ansible and Jinja 2 templates and how they did it and what the performance improvements were. We went from like thousands of seconds to just 35 seconds of a performance improvement. Really great show and tell there. Next one. We're seeing more community blog posts. We have to use Google Translate increasingly because I don't read Japanese, but to be able to search, please use QLang, hashtag QLang or Q or at Q-Lang if you're using Mastodon or if you're using Twitter so that we can try to catch these. But this person wrote step-by-step on using Q and Terraform. So I have gone and tried to translate that. I don't speak Japanese, but it was really useful to read about how they were this sort of intermediate transformation from Q to JSON, JSON to HCL. Next
This
slide.
was just, sorry, briefly, Carmen. I guess one thing we haven't been doing so well, especially over the holiday period, was actually tweeting out links to this sort of community content. We are going to do a better job of that. And I think what would be a good idea is if folks actually want to pick up discussion on things, Twitter's obviously, or Mastodon, good places to do that, but GitHub discussions, if there's a specific article people want to sort of riff on and talk about a bit more, creating a GitHub discussion around it, as was linked a couple of slides ago, will be a really good idea. We'll try and do a better job of actually tweeting out this content in the first place so that people actually get to see it live as opposed to these periodic updates on the community calls.
Yeah, it's a good to do. All right. The next one is our friends over at JSON Schema have this thing called a schema store, which helps people, like a library hub of schemas for people to choose and pick from and share. And so again, Jonathan Matthews has taken a select subset of these and that are maintained by the Schema Store project, and then imported them and made them into Q variations. So thanks to Jonathan for getting that started. Next one.
Apologies to the Grey Matter team for the next slide. There is a typo right at the top of it, and it's a critical one.
Oh, is it the A instead of E? That's me.
I like the fact that you're British in your spelling of grey, which is great. We'll fix this in the published slides. Apologies.
Yeah. So that, yeah. I mean, blame it on all the.
I already fixed it, but I guess once you start your presentation, that didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. But this was a tweet from your CEO, Chris, so Alec and Jack. But yeah, they had a live webinar, really, really good, to show how, talking about the configuration complexity clock and how Q can help be that configuration language that helps with these kind of big problems that especially are now hitting the enterprise and in Grey Matter's neck of the woods. So next one. So that wraps up the things we were found in and around the ecosystem. If we missed it, please email us, ping us, put it in the show and tell and in the discussions GitHub repo, put it in Slack community or general, or again, email documentation@q.works. We try our best to try to keep our finger on the pulse, but we do, of course, miss things, and we want to acknowledge that. But with that, thank you for this month's edition of Around the World.
Can I just quickly go back to this one and ask the Grey Matter folks, is this published somewhere? Did I miss a tweet? Jack, I joined live, but then I didn't see whether there was like a published video of this available afterwards.
Yeah, it's on our website, greymatter.io.
Great.
It should just be right on the front page.
Awesome. We'll tweet out a link to that, and I'll fix the spelling of Grey Matter.
Grey
Apologies
Matter with
again.
an E.
Thanks. It was a really good session. I was sort of an interloper and just listening to that. Did a fantastic job.
All right, Paula, it's over to you.
No, it's over to you, Carmen. Next Docs and
Oh.
Content call.
Oh, okay. Well, it's I have what are you working on? So yeah. Yep. All right. Perfect. Next Docs and Content call. Yep, that's me. So that is Valentine's Day. For those of you that do know, February 14th is indeed Valentine's Day. I do have, you don't see it, but I do have these little gophers with hearts around them, and maybe I won't use a background so you can see that. Then please, Jonathan Matthews has asked that we please share everything inside the Q community calendar and add some alerts, which I will do today. Next slide.
Yeah, next community call. I'll take this one. We've penciled in for February the 28th. We don't have a time yet. We will be experimenting with a different time because we'll likely have a presentation from folks who are in the positive side of GMT. And so we'll shift it to early in the day to be more sympathetic to them. But as ever, we'll record the session and then publish the link to the YouTube recording afterwards. So otherwise, feedback, this is just a regular call for feedback on things that you'd like to see more of, less of, and areas where you'd like us to focus on. Please reach out to any one of us individually, or tweet or Slack, whatever it might be. We're super happy and delighted when we get feedback on things that people would like to see improved. Q&A, we've had a number of questions throughout. We are slightly over, apologies for that, but if anybody has anything they would like to bring up now, please feel free to unmute yourself and just shout it out. Fog, please.
Oh, hi. So actually, I want to ask that the fill pass function provided in Go SDK will actually return a new value after filling. I mean, instead of filling the pass in the original value. So I'm not sure, will this behavior cause some memory problem, or will community provide some report of performance testing?
Marcel, I guess we could sort of perhaps pick that up. That's the fill path method returning a new value as opposed to a mutated value.
Yeah, it does return a new value, so it does share as much as possible. But it does evaluate all the other structures around it, right? So that's yeah.
If there's a specific issue, Fog, you're seeing there, we'd certainly be happy to follow up on that afterwards. It's perhaps best to do that in a discussion or an issue. You'll know, Fog, that we have linked to, in previous community calls, I don't have the link available to me now, alternatives to that API.
Yeah.
But again, that will always return a copy, because that's the immutability aspect of fill path returning a copy as opposed to mutating the original actually has some very nice properties that we probably won't ever want to sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. The Q value needs to remain immutable for things to work. Yeah. But there's definitely, if we have this patch API that we intend for 0.6, I forgot the name for it. So that would be, that would still create a new value, but it would at least not reevaluate it. It would set one specific point in the node to a new value, basically.
Fog would be really happy to follow up on any specific problems that you're seeing afterwards, because it might well be that there are other aspects of Q that are creating a memory problem that are manifesting via fill path. But there shouldn't be a specific issue with fill path per se.
Oh, I see. So I'm not sure that will the community provide some report of performance testing in the near future, or is there a plan?
As in, are you seeing a specific issue at the moment around it, or?
No, like the general performance testing report.
Yeah. Also, so we did add a feature to 0.5. It's the last CL for 0.5 that at least it's sort of an internal and experimental feature, but it reports the number of core operations. So you can, instead of using runtime, you can compare this precise number. So you see how many unifications and disjunctions and conjunctions and all that stuff are done. So that might give you some performance indication. So in general, in 0.6, we like to focus more on structure sharing. So that should also make fill, like more performant if there's nothing changed. Or in certain cases, certain computations can be shared, basically. But I'm not quite sure. Performance problems are very specific, right? So I'm not quite sure what you're requesting. So we are releasing more tools to measure performance, but for very specific performance issues, right? Like you have to let us know what these are.
Yep, I was going to say it's always going to be the best, and I know with a number of folks on the call, thank you for submitting performance issues. As you know, that's going to be something we start to tackle more fervently in 0.6. Thank you for submitting configurations that suffer from performance issues. We're going to get better at the actual performance itself, but as Alec and others are sort of indicating, yes, it's good to also be able to see how that performance is changing as well. And Unity will also be leveraging these stats as well, so that we can see on a configuration, on a change by change basis, have we improved or worsened effectively the performance from like a wall time perspective as well as a queue perspective, not only for our internal tests, but guess what, everything in Unity as well.
Yeah, and one thing that we also, one more note on this, one thing that we've also been thinking about is, so a queue profiler, which should be quite straightforward to do, so that you not only count the number of operations, but count the number of operations per node in the tree. So that way you could fairly easily identify the hotspots in the configuration, right? So that should, should make things a lot easier to debug performance.
But happy to follow up on that after one more specifically afterwards, Fog.
Okay, thanks.
Super, great. Steve.
This is something that, excuse me, came up in Slack a while ago, but a coworker of mine just ran into this question too. This concerns the qdef command. Right now, when you run qdef, it consolidates a bunch of Q and it emits Q code with no package declaration. And I remember asking whether we could have a flag, command line flag, that would say, I would like you to write this into a particular package. Or maybe the answer is, just use the cat command and splat a package declaration ahead of it.
Does the -p argument or flag not do that?
It
should.
does not. I think that it specifies the package for unified non-Q data.
Okay, yeah.
What to consider that. But what I was wondering was, one thing here is you could say, oh, you can file an issue. We can discuss it, but I'm wondering, was this a deliberate choice?
No, it's not a deliberate choice.
Okay. Does it make sense to put the generated code into a package?
I think it does. I mean, if it originates from a package, I actually thought it would already print a package, but apparently it doesn't. But even if it does not have a package, the original code, then it makes sense to be able to override it with a -p flag. I actually thought it already did that. So,
okay.
So it should.
I was also wondering, I just, forgive me, but I find qdef to be kind of an odd duck in the command set, and I was wondering if it's slated to survive. We've talked a little bit about how the set of commands might evolve.
Yeah, it's a very specific command. That's true, but it definitely has a purpose. So qeval might not survive, but we see that people see it as beneficial. There is a certain use to it, but it would be then a more principled alternative that would take its place, and eval would stay around as a deprecated command, which basically means it's still around, but it's if you do help, it will not show, right? So that's yeah. But basically, so export will grow more into really exporting Q, so splitting up a Q evaluation into different files and for data. So qdef serves a purpose because basically it shows the entire configuration, right? It's basically the only command where you can evaluate Q, where it basically retains the same semantics as the original, both for eval and export. That's not the case, right? For qdef, it should retain the semantics of the original. And you can use it, for example, to collect a bunch of packages together to create one unit out of it, right? Like one large configuration that does the same thing. Or you can use it to simplify schema, right? Like that's sort of the intent. But right now, all these commands do eval, def, and export. It's more like different ways of printing it. But the idea is that they do more specifically what they intended to do, to export, really generate the data, potentially split it up into files, def really to validate and sort of like normalize schema while retaining the same semantics as the original, and then something in the middle that's really useful for development, right? And for Q evaluation to sort of see what Q does. Those are the three sort of views.
I think there's a good challenge, Steve, you can present is that if you find yourself saying, I want to achieve X, right? And if A, it's not clear how to achieve X, or even B, if it's not even implemented, or C, not even documented as to where that should live within the Q commands, there's effectively a problem that we need to fix one way or another there. So it's very much the case that there's lack of clarity there, maybe even lack of implementation when it comes to, for example, this -P thing. There might even be ambiguity in some situations. So please challenge on all of these things. By all means, raise issues. If it's a bug because of missing documentation or missing implementation, we'll happily work through it and just work out how the Q command itself needs to reshape over time.
That's fair. I just want to say real quick, I saw, Marcel, as you were talking, I saw Tony's comment and Paul's off to the side. I was going to bring this up as another question about how imports are preserved, import declarations. Is this actually implemented, Paul?
Yeah.
This inline
Yeah.
I missed this because just
you haven't
like
really. It's not been announced in the release notes yet for 0.5, so you haven't missed it officially.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So basically, def by default will just keep the import statements, right? Because it still depends on the same packages. But yeah, you can do inline imports, and you can even do inline imports with an expression. Right, so basically drill down into the definition, and it will make sure that that definition is self-contained, right? So it will resolve the import. So you don't need inline imports for that necessarily, but you can make a self-contained definition, and it will then include, I don't even know what it does, but it will include like let expressions, I believe, at the top level for anything that it refers to outside that definition to make a self-contained blob of that part of Q, right? And that's really one thing that you want def for, right? That you can retain the same semantics for like some subset of Q that if you've evaluated.
It's reassuring to me that you don't know how it works. That's good.
Well, because there's multiple ways to implement it, and it might change, right? But it doesn't.
Well, let me just say, just joke. So we have some cases where we use def, QDef. We have Bazel rules written that do this, and we have to declare all the dependencies, including to take care of the import statements. So we run def, it spits out some Q, which is an output, and we consume that elsewhere through some other Bazel target. And as it stands, we have to restate the dependencies of the files that we ran through QDef, because again, the import statements are preserved. So in a sense, the next piece of Q code that uses that emitted file needs to take care of making all of those imports available for resolution as well. So the inline imports thing sounds like exactly like what we were looking for, where basically the output is self-contained, as you said, no dependencies remain.
It's quite handy for debugging also. So if QDef fails, it doesn't work. But so if there's already a bug in the original, like configuration, but other than that, if you want to find some misbehavior, it's really nice to have just one file to work from, right? So you can just expand everything and then start trimming, and it's quite nice. We use it quite a bit.
Great, I'll experiment with that. Thank you.
Great, we're very much over. If anybody has any urgent last-minute questions, please feel free. Otherwise, look forward to seeing everybody on Slack or on the next community call or wherever it may be. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.